Okay, welcome to the News Hub. So, without further ado, let's have a dive in and see what the news has in store for us for the last 7 days. Okay, the top UK news stories for the last 7 days. That's taking a long while to move. There we are. So, the top news story from the last 7 days is government accountability and transparency. Independent investigative groups like the Bureau of Investigative Journalism continue to highlight concerns around public sector contracts and procurement transparency, government handling of surveillance powers, and failures in democratic oversight. These themes remain central to their reporting. Well, the public sector contracts and procurement transparency, that may well have something to do with the Palantir controversy that we're facing at the moment. Palantir was awarded a contract, a very hefty contract, for our information databases, and being the company that would look after, we'll say, our information databases. And with the light being shone on the recent debacle around Epstein and Peter Thiel's involvement in that, there has been a lot of backlash across all social media about our government effectively not putting out the tender to more than one person and just accepting that he was the person to do the job without looking at any other alternatives. So I would hazard a guess that's what that's about. Government handing of surveillance powers. That will be the facial recognition technology, the FRT. They are using it more and more. It's the fact that they're letting us know they're using it. The big vans showing that they are using facial recognition technology in this area at this time. But that's when they've already set it up and when they're actually using it. So you don't get forewarned. And it feels like a massive infringement. I've already done the facial recognition technology research hub. You can find that on YouTube. So you can see what I think about that, and also what a lot of other people feel about it as well. So there is a lot of controversy surrounding that. And the failures in democratic oversight. Yeah, all of these things being put upon us rather than democratically consulted. Is this something that you would consider? Is this something that you would feel would help in the overall picture of our either policing or our governance of our country? We put them in power and there's no democracy at the moment because they're just implementing things without letting us know, without telling us. So I would hazard a guess that's where the failures in democratic oversight come in. Political power, media narratives, and democratic health. Left-leaning alternative outlets, Novara Media, The Canary, Squawk Box, have focused on critiques of government messaging and media framing, analysis of political party strategies, coverage of protests and grassroots movements. These platforms often challenge mainstream narratives and highlight stories underreported by corporate media. Yet again, things that we've covered, things that we've looked at. So critiques of government messaging and media framing. Well, we know that our mainstream media is captured. It has to go through the DSMA, and anything that's deemed could look badly on government structure is not shown to the public, is not given to the public, or is altered in some way, shape, or form. Analysis of political party strategies, coverage of protests and grassroots movements. Yeah, the mainstream media don't really like to cover protests and grass roots movements. And we have had a bit of backlash this week. The proscription for Palestine action was lifted by a court, and everybody was very happy about that, and they deemed it an unlawful act. So I would hazard a guess that's to do with that, especially when it comes to the messaging and media framing, because there's been a bit of a backlash when it comes to the MPs over it. They want it to be looked at again, even though a court has deemed that it was unlawful to proscribe Palestine action. But there also, around that, there will be a lot of questions when it comes to the amount of people who were arrested during that time. But at the moment, as it stands, the police are not allowed to arrest people for protesting. Cost of living crisis and an economic inequality. Independent sources continue to spotlight rising household financial pressures, corporate profiteering, failures in welfare policy. This remains a dominant theme across alternative UK media due to its ongoing national impact. Now, if you go on X and you look at Keir Starmer and you look at what he's posting on X, according to him, everything's going really, really well. The cost of living crisis, we're coming out of the cost of living crisis. When it comes to energy and everything else, it's all wonderful. He's doing everything he said he was going to do, and yes, it's going swimmingly. But when you actually open up and look at the comments, he's being ratioed every time. If you don't understand ratio on X, it's the amount of likes you get compared to the amount of comments that are there. And invariably, when the comments get opened up, they're all very negative. And people are actually highlighting that he's lying. It is not better. Inflation, he said that inflation was down, and it isn't. It isn't. It's gone up since he's been in power. So yeah, there is a crisis still, and it's the alternative media that are pointing these things out. It isn't the mainstream. National Health Service pressures and public health. Alternative outlets frequently cover underfunding and staffing shortages, privatisation concerns, and patient safety issues. These stories often appear with more critical framing than in mainstream outlets. Don't they just? The thing that I have seen over social media about the National Health Service was actually to do with reform. I had no idea. I know reform is leading in the polls, but I had no idea that reform actually are looking to do away with our National Health Service. I wasn't aware that was one of their policies, mainly because I don't look at any of the politicians' policies across any of the parties. My whole ethos on politics is we need to have it all scrapped. The whole governance system in our country needs to be scrapped, and we need to start again. And it doesn't matter who's in power, because they're all kowtowing to the global overlords. So I was quite shocked when I read that Starmer was looking to, not Starmer, Farage of the Reform Party was looking to do away with our National Health Service. I think if a lot of people who support Starmer realise that, they might not be so happy. Underfunding and staffing shortages. We know that our National Health Service is chronically underfunded. Privatisation concerns. Well, within the National Health Service itself, the privatisation has already started. When I was in hospital for that prolonged period of time over the 4 months, I spoke to a lot of different staff. So I spoke to the ladies who came and cleaned my room, the nurses who came and changed the linen on the beds and things like that. And I spoke to them about how they felt about what was going on. And a lot of the ladies that came, to the auxiliary nurses that came and cleaned, they said that they had been effectively taken off their contracts given a new contract. They weren't sacked. They were given a new contract under a privatisation, so that they were a separate entity, more or less. So they lost a lot of benefits that they had within the National Health Service under their original contracts. And then when I spoke to people who were changing the beds, they were saying that the linen is now outsourced. It used to be done in-house. It used to be done as part of the National Health Service. It isn't anymore. It's outsourced to a private company. The food side of things, not part of the National Health Service anymore. It's privatised. So there are privatisation concerns. And patient safety issues, I'm not aware. I haven't heard about patient safety issues. That's something I would look into. Climate, environment and energy. Environmental reporting from independent platforms tends to emphasise government inaction on climate commitments, fossil fuel lobbying, and local environmental justice campaigns. This week continues that trend, especially around energy pricing and environmental regulation. Energy pricing is a big issue. It is a massive issue. We've talked about this before when it's popped up on the news hub. When people have to make a choice between whether to feed themselves or whether to heat their homes, that's a massive failure. That is a massive failure. And also when you look at the profits that are made by these energy companies, and those profits go to their shareholders, they're not disseminated through so that it alleviates the pressure on you and me, the general public. Government inaction on climate commitments. I've got a graph that I could show you. I might flash it up when I do the edit. That shows over a very long period of time the climate in our world, and the climate crisis proponents, the people who talk about the climate crisis, are going off of data that we've been collating basically from a certain period of time. But when you actually look at the historical over the lifetime of the planet, we're actually in a cooling period. We're coming out of a cooling period, admittedly, but it's really the coolest the planet's been for an awfully long time. And I saw a piece where Bill Gates was talking about the climate, and he effectively said that it was a bit of a hoax, which I was quite shocked about because he was one of the biggest proponents about it. So I'm very debatable when it comes to the climate crisis. I have a feeling that one of the issues we have at the moment is the fact that our governments all around the world have decided to start interfering with nature and seeding clouds, and they've admitted to doing that. They've admitted to what they're up to. And if we could just stop interfering with nature and let her run her course, I don't think we would have quite as many problems as we have. Okay, so that was Microsoft. That was Copilot. And Copilot, instead of just going to the independent like he has been over the last however many months that we've been looking, has actually started understanding that I want to look at alternative sources of media, not just one. So that was Copilot. Some things that I will look into, I will have a check on the National Health Service side of things, just to keep up to date with it and see what's going on there, especially for the patient safety idea. That's a little bit concerning. So we'll look into that. And now we'll go and ask Claude exactly the same question. Okay, so this is Claude for the last 7 days. Top news stories, politics and government. Reform UK developments. Nigel Farage unveiled Reform UK's new shadow cabinet with several familiar faces. And there have been reports of internal turmoil with a Reform UK councillor in Worcestershire quitting the party over council tax increases. Okay. Well, it has been interesting that Nigel Farage has shown his shadow cabinet. He doesn't have a health minister. As of me talking to you at this exact moment in time, he hasn't appointed a health minister to his shadow cabinet, should he be elected. And I did have a wonder whether that might be possibly because he doesn't want to have the National Health Service anymore. Could be. Labour's leadership crisis. Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's chief of staff, has quit, with alternative media reporting this was hoped to ease pressure from the ongoing Mandelson scandal. However, McSweeney's resignation hasn't ended speculation about Starmer's future, with few outside Downing Street expecting him to last much longer. I hate to do the I told you so dance, but I did say that I didn't think he would be in power much longer. When I announced that, I really thought that Trump would be out of power soon as well. I think it was the same news hub, I said that my expectation was that Keir wouldn't last much longer either. It's really difficult to get over the issues that are facing our country at the moment, and the fact that nobody in the UK, none of the Joe Schmo public, you and me, none of us really like him. We don't care for him at all. And we think he's been doing a really quite atrocious job. So it doesn't surprise me. And Morgan McSweeney, it says he's quit. I don't know whether he's quit or whether he was asked to stand down. Not that that makes much difference. But yeah, it's supposed to ease pressure. It hasn't eased the pressure. Epstein file scandal. Multiple independent sources are covering the ongoing fallout from the Jeffrey Epstein files release. Keir Starmer has given the Met Office a dossier relating to emails between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein. An investigation found 87 flights linked to Jeffrey Epstein had arrived or departed from UK airports between the early 1990s and 2018, with Essex Police now assessing information around private flights to Stansted Airport. I did see this coverage. I did see this. According to Stansted Airport, they're not at fault. Stansted Airport govern where you and I, the general public, would go when it comes to arriving on a flight and any transfers to go to a different airplane to get on a different flight to go somewhere else, or coming off the plane and actually entering the country. For Joe Schmo, you and me, that's all governed by Stansted Airport. But according to Stansted Airport, when a private plane is chartered and comes into Stansted Airport, they don't actually have anything to do with that. So I'm not sure who would be responsible for checking the flight logs, the manifests, and seeing who was actually on board. So that would be checking passports and things like that, and whether that's what the police are looking into at the moment, who it is that checks those passports to see if there was possibly anything untoward going on with these 87 flights that are linked to arriving or departing from the UK with Mr. Epstein. So, yeah, that's ongoing. I presume we'll find out more about that later. Other stories. Council by-election warning. Labour handed Reform a council by-election win in what's being described as a warning for Gorton and Denton. I didn't know anything about that. Prisoner escapes. A prisoner due to be deported from Britain has absconded from custody for the second time in a week. How interesting that our police force can be really quite brutal when it comes to UK citizens and pinning them down when they hold placards or carting them off when they're saying, I oppose genocide. But when it comes to a prisoner that was due to be deported, they've absconded twice. How have they managed to do that? It doesn't go into detail. We could look at Yahoo and see. These independent outlets, Byline Times, Novara Media, Canary, and Open Democracy, tend to focus on investigative journalism, progressive politics, and stories they feel mainstream media underreports or misrepresents. So again, not a huge amount this week for me to dive into from a health and wellbeing point of view. So we'll now go to Grok. And we'll ask Grok, Super Grok, Super Grok, try it for free. Unlock extended capabilities. I wonder what those would be. So we'll go to Grok and we'll ask Grok the same question. Well, Grok is pulling me up on what I said earlier about inflation. Inflation drops to 3%, the lowest in nearly a year, fueling speculation about Bank of England interest rate cuts soon. This has been highlighted in financial and Reuters-style reporting, with knock-on effects for household costs and economic bets. Child sexual abuse cases surging, with police arresting around 1,000 paedophile suspects monthly nationwide. Reports from agencies like the National Crime Agency point to technology, especially mainstream social media, driving the increase, and rescues of children from sexual harm up 50% in 5 years. 1,000 paedophile suspects. That may well be in response to Rupert Lowe's ongoing investigation into the rape gangs, possibly. The small boat migrant crossings. So point 3. Small boat migrant crossings. Ongoing data from government sources shows continued irregular arrivals across the English Channel in the last week, a persistent flashpoint in alternative discussions on border control and immigration policy. Now, those alternative discussions they're talking about are from Rupert Lowe, not Robert Lowe, Rupert Lowe, who has started his new party last week, which is called Restore Britain. And he's done a lot of posting on his social media saying that, as far as he's concerned, every single hotel that's being used to house immigrants, they will all be taken and they will all be deported back to the countries from whence they came. He's also talked about any illegal immigrants that are living in the UK will all be deported. And he's talking millions. He's saying, as far as he's concerned, they all have to go back home. The UK is a sovereign country for British residents, and as far as he's concerned, that is their policy. There will be mass deportations. So I would hazard a guess the persistent flashpoint in alternative discussions on border control and immigration policy is Restore Britain through Rupert Lowe. And he's actually getting quite a lot of backlash. He's also getting a lot of support. I mean, he's moving up the rankings with his new party that's only been established for about a week. He's got a lot of support. There's 60,000, I think, people have signed up to Restore UK. He's a former Reform politician, so he was with Farage. And Farage would have you believe that he threw him out because of his immigration thoughts. I'm not so sure. I think there was probably a clash of personalities. From what I can tell from Rupert Lowe, he's quite He's quite firm in his beliefs, and he's quite firm in what he says, and one of the things that he's been saying through Restore is, "I will never lie to the British public." And that's got to be one of the biggest problems that we have with our politicians as they stand at the moment, the persistent lies that come out of our politicians. And I've said before, if we took the Welsh initiative where they say that if a politician lies, they should be stripped of their status, then we wouldn't have such a problem. But Rupert Lowe has said that he will never lie to the UK public. Um, and that's his immigration policy is, no, you're not coming to our country. There will be a red list of countries that are not allowed to enter the UK for an immigration purpose. So it'll be interesting. I would imagine that's what that's about, especially with the small boat migrant crossings. As soon as they arrive, if Restore Britain are in power, they will be deporting them straight away. Okay, Reform UK political developments, including pledges and criticisms. Figures like Nigel Farage and Robert Jenrick have been in the spotlight for policy announcements, e.g. on benefits, Equality Act, Bank of England, OBR plans, shadow cabinet unveils and attacks on past governments. Alternative Voices on X debate reform's record on issues like migration, lockdowns and more. Well, I already spoke about Reform deciding that they weren't going to have a health minister, and that possibly highlighting the fact that they don't want the National Health Service anymore, which is concerning, very concerning. But he's been parading around recently like he's won the election. I mean, he is, when you look at the polls, he is right up there. And I think that's why Starmer threatened the rest of his cabinet with, "I will call a general election if you don't back me and keep me in power." Because they know that if a general election is called at the moment, Reform will get in. Northern Ireland tensions and cultural resistance. Post highlighted Protestant area building symbolic bonfires, e.g. effigies of migrant boats, as a stand against perceived invasion, framing as tribal defence of British Christian identity. Discussions also touch on puberty blocker trials, facing pushback in Northern Ireland, and broader unionist optimism. I haven't actually seen anything about the Northern Ireland tensions. From a health and well-being point of view, not necessarily something that I would look into, but it would be interesting just to have a look. The fact that they're burning or building symbolic bonfires as a stand against the perceived invasion. One thing I had heard about Ireland is that they have taken on a massive amount of immigrants into Ireland. Okay, weather and flooding impacts. We had to have the weather on one of them, didn't we? Weather and flooding impacts. Unsettled conditions with heavy rain, snow warnings and flood risks continuing, including recovery phases in areas like Somerset after major incidents. We discussed this last week. We've discussed this every week since January. And I think it stopped raining consistently about 4 or 5 days ago. I think one of the issues when it comes to flooding, we looked at the fact that trees have been uprooted, which is an issue. So the big trees that would do a massive uptake of water, runoff water, have gone. So that's one of the issues that contributes to flooding. We spoke last week about the geoengineering and the fact that possibly we're causing it to rain by spraying all those particles into the clouds. But there was something else that kind of came across and sprung to mind recently, over the last week actually, about flooding. Another issue is the fact that our government aren't looking at our drainage properly, and possibly our drainage systems are all blocked. Not all blocked, but that could be contributing to the fact that the runoff of water is not going where it's supposed to and there are drainage issues in different places. So it'd be very interesting to know if Somerset have got problems with their drainage. Other notable mentions: British skiers killed in French Alps avalanche, multiple incidents in a short time. Oh, that's tragic. Protests, chaos, claims around asylum related cases, e.g. in Folkestone, though some debunked as misattributed images. Not sure about that. Haven't heard anything about that at all. Broader debates on migration turned potentially negative net this year. Economic hits similar to Brexit effects and institutional critique, e.g. the police, DEI in recruitment, and civil service resistance. Well, there have been debates about policing. We found out that a large portion of young men from our country have gone off to serve in the IDF, which beggars belief. DEI in recruitment, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There is a possibility that that can go too far. I agree with diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I think if you have a diverse population within your company, you have diverse voices, and I think that's very important. But it can go the other way, where people are just purely hired because they're slightly more diverse than others, and that takes it into the realm of, well, that's not great for our country, because the people in positions aren't able to do the work that they're put in the position to do. So there is a possibility that that could go too far. And civil service resistance, we had that last week. So these stories reflect what bubbles up strongly, says Grok, in non-mainstream channels like X Threads, independent commentators, and alternative outlets. They often emphasize immigration, crime, economic pressures, and political resistance more than traditional coverage. I wonder why. Okay. So not very much that I'm going to be looking at from a health and wellbeing point of view this week across all three of the platforms, the AI platforms that I've looked and asked of. But there are a few things that I will take note of and come back to see if they're research worthy enough to go onto the research hub. But for now, that's the news for this week.